Daniel trudged up the narrow mountain path with a sack of supplies slung over one shoulder. The day had begun before sunrise, and now darkness was settling over the wilderness. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, covering the ground in a thin white layer that crunched beneath his boots. The wind carried the scent of pine and ice, sweeping down from the higher peaks and cutting through his heavy coat. The mountains had always felt different after sunset. During the day they seemed vast and beautiful, but at night they became something else entirely, silent, mysterious, and powerful. Every shadow appeared deeper, every sound carried farther. Daniel had grown up among these ridges and forests, yet he still felt a sense of respect whenever darkness arrived. Ahead, a faint glow appeared between the trees. His cabin. The sight eased some of the exhaustion weighing on him. The cabin had belonged to his Uncle Henry for decades. It was built from rough pine logs harvested from the surrounding forest long before Daniel was born. Time had weathered the wood until it blended naturally with the mountain landscape. To strangers it looked old and neglected, but to Daniel it represented stability, memories, and family. 6 months had passed since Henry's death. Even now the thought felt strange. The old man had seemed indestructible. He had survived blizzards, floods, harsh winters, and injuries that would have sent most people into retirement. Yet in the end, age had quietly taken him. Daniel still remembered the final conversation they had shared. Henry had been sitting beside the fireplace, staring into the flames. "One day this place will belong to you," he had said. Daniel had laughed at the time. "I don't need a cabin. You'll understand eventually." Those words lingered in Daniel's mind almost every day now. He reached the porch and brushed snow from his boots before opening the door. Warmth greeted him immediately. The fire inside the stove was still burning nicely. He placed his supplies on the table and removed his coat. The familiar scent of wood smoke filled the room. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning. A lantern hung near the wall. A worn rocking chair stood beside the fireplace. Several shelves held old books, tools, and keepsakes collected over decades. It wasn't luxurious. But it was home. Daniel moved around the kitchen area preparing a simple meal. He sliced potatoes, heated a pan, and placed water over the stove to boil. The routine was comforting. Living alone required discipline. There was nobody else to repair things, gather firewood, or prepare meals. Every task depended on him. Most people would have found the isolation difficult. Daniel preferred it. The mountains asked for nothing except effort and respect. People were often more complicated. As supper cooked, he glanced through the window. Snow was falling harder now. The forest beyond the cabin had become a wall of darkness. Anyone caught outside tonight would have trouble traveling. The thought barely crossed his mind before a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Daniel froze. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined it. Visitors were rare. Unexpected visitors were almost unheard of. Another knock sounded. This one louder. He slowly moved toward the door. Instinctively he reached for the lantern hanging nearby. A dozen possibilities crossed his mind. Maybe a traveler had become stranded. Perhaps a hunter needed assistance. Or someone from town had brought news. The third knock arrived before he reached the entrance. Daniel opened the door. Cold wind immediately swept inside. Standing on the porch was a woman. She appeared to be in her late 20s. Snow covered her coat and shoulders. Strands of dark hair had escaped from beneath her hood. A small leather travel bag hung at her side. She looked exhausted. Not merely tired. Exhausted in a way that suggested she had traveled far and carried burdens much heavier than her bag. For several seconds neither spoke. The woman studied him carefully. Confusion appeared on her face. "You're not Henry." Daniel blinked. The mention of his uncle's name surprised him. "No." The woman's expression tightened. Where is he? A brief silence followed. Daniel hated answering this question. Every time he said the words, Henry's death felt real all over again. He passed away. The woman's eyes widened. What? 6 months ago. The color seemed to drain from her face. She stared past him into the cabin as though expecting Henry to appear and prove otherwise. No, she whispered. That can't be right. I'm sorry. The woman lowered her gaze. Snow continued collecting on her shoulders. For several moments she remained motionless. Daniel noticed how cold she looked. Her gloves were damp. Her cheeks were bright red from exposure. Whatever journey had brought her here clearly hadn't been easy. You should come inside, he said. She hesitated. I don't want to impose. You'll freeze out there. The wind answered for her, sending another blast of snow across the porch. Finally she nodded. Daniel stepped aside. She entered cautiously. The warmth of the cabin immediately surrounded her. A visible sigh escaped her lips. He closed the door behind her. For several moments she simply stood near the stove, allowing feeling to return to her hands. Daniel poured coffee into a mug and handed it to her. She accepted it gratefully. Thank you. You're welcome. The woman wrapped both hands around the mug. The steam rose toward her face. Some color slowly returned to her cheeks. My name is Daniel. She looked up. Emma. The introduction felt strangely formal in the quiet cabin. Daniel sat across from her. Emma took a careful sip of coffee. Neither spoke for a minute. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like both were deciding how much to reveal. Finally Daniel asked the obvious question. How did you know my uncle? Emma stared into her cup. My father knew him. From around here? She shook her head. No. Years ago. A shadow passed across her expression. My father talked about Henry many times when I was growing up. Daniel listened carefully. He always described him as the most honorable man he'd ever met. The compliment sounded exactly like something Henry would have earned. Emma reached into her bag. After searching briefly, she removed a folded envelope. The paper looked old. Very old. She held it carefully. My father left this for me. Daniel watched as she unfolded the letter. The last few years were difficult, she said quietly. After he died, I found this among his belongings. Her fingers trembled slightly. I didn't understand it at first. She handed him the paper. Daniel adjusted the lantern closer and began reading. The handwriting belonged to Emma's father. Near the bottom, one sentence immediately caught his attention. If life becomes too difficult, go to Henry. He made a promise long ago. You will always have a place with him. Daniel read the line twice. When he looked up, Emma was watching him. My father used to make jokes about that promise. What kind of jokes? A faint smile touched her lips. He'd tell people I had already been promised to Henry. Daniel nearly laughed from surprise. Emma gave a small shrug. I never knew whether he was serious. The room fell silent again. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the cabin walls. Snow struck the windows. Emma stared into the fire. I traveled all this way because I didn't know what else to do. Her voice sounded smaller now. More vulnerable. When I arrived and discovered Henry was gone. She looked down. I realized I had nowhere to go. Daniel felt an unexpected heaviness in his chest. The loneliness in her voice was unmistakable. For the first time, he noticed how tightly she held the mug, as though it were the only solid thing left in her life. Outside, the mountain disappeared beneath swirling snow. Night had fully arrived. No traveler could safely leave now. Daniel glanced toward the storm and then back at Emma. Whatever mystery surrounded her arrival could wait until morning. The important thing was simple. She needed shelter. "You can stay here tonight," he said. Emma looked up. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Relief filled her eyes. A genuine relief so powerful that Daniel realized she had been expecting rejection. "Thank you," she whispered. Neither of them knew it yet. Neither could have guessed. But the unexpected knock on the cabin door that snowy night was about to change the course of both their lives forever. The storm refused to leave. For 3 days, snow buried the mountain beneath a thick white blanket. The road leading to town vanished entirely, and the forest surrounding the cabin became a frozen wilderness of silence and drifting snow. Daniel had seen storms like this before. The mountains often decided when people could travel and when they had to stay put. Emma remained at the cabin because there was no other choice. The first morning after her arrival felt awkward. Both moved carefully around each other, unsure of how to share the small space. Daniel prepared breakfast while Emma offered to help. By noon she was cleaning shelves, sweeping floors, and organizing supplies that had been scattered around the cabin for months. Daniel returned from gathering firewood to find the living room transformed. Blankets were folded neatly. Dusty corners had been cleaned. Even the old lanterns looked brighter. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. Emma smiled while placing books back onto a shelf. "I know." "Then why did you?" She shrugged. "It feels good to be useful." The answer stayed with him longer than he expected. As the days passed, a routine developed naturally between them. Daniel handled the outdoor work. Emma managed the cabin. They shared meals, coffee, and long conversations beside the fireplace. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself talking about things he normally kept to himself. He told her stories about growing up in the mountains. About learning to fish from Henry. About repairing roofs during storms and surviving winters that seemed endless. Emma listened carefully to every story. In return, she spoke about her own life. She described caring for her father during his illness. The job she had worked. The apartment she had lost after debts piled up. The loneliness that followed after her father's death. One evening, while searching for extra blankets in the attic, Emma discovered an old wooden chest hidden beneath a tarp. Dust covered the lid. Curious, she dragged it downstairs. Daniel immediately recognized it. That belonged to Henry. Inside were dozens of letters tied together with fading ribbons. Many were decades old. The handwriting on several envelopes caught Emma's attention. "My father's name." They exchanged surprised looks. Carefully, they began reading. The letters revealed a friendship stretching back many years. Henry and Emma's father had shared hardships, business failures, and adventures long before either Daniel or Emma had been born. Again and again, the same themes appeared. Trust. Loyalty. Sacrifice. Then Daniel unfolded one letter that looked particularly important. The paper crackled with age. As he read, his expression changed. "What is it?" Emma asked. Daniel handed her the page. Near the center, one paragraph stood out. Henry had written that if anything ever happened to Emma's family, his home would always be open to them. He considered the debt between them impossible to repay and intended to honor that promise for the rest of his life. Emma read the passage twice. Then a slow smile appeared. "So that's it." Daniel nodded. "The promise. There was never some strange engagement." "No." Emma laughed. "Good." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why good?" She grinned. "Because I wasn't excited about discovering I had been promised to a man 40 years older than me." Daniel burst out laughing. The sound filled the cabin. For a moment neither felt alone. Outside, snow continued falling against the windows, but inside the cabin something had changed. The mystery surrounding Henry's promise had finally been solved. Yet neither Daniel nor Emma realized that another story was only beginning. The morning arrived clear and bright. For the first time in days, sunlight poured across the mountains. Snow-covered peaks sparkled beneath a cloudless sky, and the frozen valley stretched endlessly below the cabin. The storm had finally passed. Emma stood near the window, watching the light reflect across the snow. "It looks completely different," she said softly. Daniel glanced outside. The mountain always changes after a storm. The roads would be passable by afternoon. With enough effort, she could leave. The realization settled heavily between them. During the previous days, neither had spoken much about what would happen once the weather improved. It had been easier to focus on daily tasks and shared conversations. Now there was no avoiding it. Emma quietly packed her belongings. The small travel bag she had carried up the mountain sat open on the table. There wasn't much inside. A few clothes. Some photographs. The letter from her father. Everything she owned fit into one bag. Daniel watched from across the room. A strange feeling settled in his chest. For years he had lived alone without complaint. Solitude had become part of his life. Yet the thought of Emma leaving felt unexpectedly difficult. The cabin no longer seemed like the same place it had been before her arrival. The rooms felt warmer. The evenings felt shorter. The silence felt less welcome. Emma zipped her bag and looked around one final time. A faint smile touched her face. "It's strange." Daniel leaned against the wall. "What is?" "A week ago I had never seen this place." She glanced toward the fireplace. "Now it feels familiar." Daniel nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. The cabin had become familiar to him all over again. Not because the building had changed. Because the person inside it had. Emma picked up her bag. "I should probably go." The words sounded uncertain. As if she hoped someone might give her a reason not to. Daniel walked to the door and opened it. Cold mountain air drifted inside. The truck stood waiting outside. Everything was ready. Still neither moved. Emma stepped onto the porch. Daniel followed. The valley below shimmered beneath fresh snow. For a long moment they stood side by side in silence. Finally Emma looked toward him. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me." "I do." Her eyes softened. "When I arrived here, I had nowhere to go." Daniel looked away briefly. "You weren't exactly a burden." A small laugh escaped her. "No. No." Another silence followed. This one felt different. More important. Emma tightened her grip on the bag. "I don't know what comes next." The honesty in her voice struck him. She wasn't talking about the journey down the mountain. She was talking about her life. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he made a decision. "If you want to stay." Emma turned toward him. "You can." For a moment she simply stared. The wind moved gently through the trees. Neither spoke. Daniel continued. "My uncle promised your father that this place would always be open to you." Emma's eyes never left his. "Is that the only reason?" The question caught him off guard. He searched for an answer. Then decided to tell the truth. "No." A smile slowly appeared on Emma's face. The kind of smile that began in the eyes before reaching the lips. She set her travel bag down on the porch. Neither needed to say anything else. The decision had already been made. Together they looked out across the mountains. The storm that had brought Emma to the cabin was gone. The uncertainty that had followed her for months was fading as well. Ahead lay challenges, hard work, and an unknown future. But for the first time in a very long time, neither of them would face it alone. The old cabin stood quietly behind them, no longer just